Hi guys, and welcome to this video. Today we'll be looking into how to draw a two-point perspective of a loft apartment. This is a fictional interior of an old industrial building like a factory or an old warehouse which has been turned into a housing. So let's jump right into this tutorial. First of all, let's take an A3 piece of paper and divide it into equal increments like shown. These are about 37 millimeters each, which represent half a meter. Then we'll mark up the vanishing point number 1, 5 centimeters away to the right of the paper edge, and vanishing point number 2, and finally connect these points with the furthermost points that we marked up previously to define the square of the room. And then following that, we'll mark up the grid on the ground pane, which will serve as a guide to then put furniture and other stuff in the interior. Similarly, we're going to divide the back wall into half a meter increment. So once we have that, we can start with actually starting to put windows on the back wall. These are going to be arched industrial type windows, pretty common in the old factories, especially in UK. So they're going to be positioned half a meter, basically 1.5 increments away from the midpoint. And then what I'm doing also is I'm using crosses to then further subdivide some of these half a meter increments to define top of the arch and also the windowsill, which is going to be 1.5 increments away from the ground pane. So next, the wall thickness was shown. I made it half a meter thick, which is about right for an old school building like this, but the depth looked a bit too much, so I reduced it using my artistic license. And then I've put the back of the arch and the top of the arch as well. So you'll notice for the next step, the sill is divided into 4 equal increments. Strictly speaking, a perspective method probably would have been better, but the distortion on that back wall is so small that it doesn't really matter in this case that I'm just using ruler to divide the sill into 4 equal parts. To get the transom spacing at half a meter distance from the sill, I've divided each spacing into 2 using this cross method. I cannot just use the back wall divisions as guides because the sill itself, as you remember previously, is 1.5 increments from the ground pane. For this next bit, we'll draw radiators at 2 increments wide, which is a meter, and then let's shave off half an increment from the top and bottom, and then also have a half an increment for the depth indicated and draw a box for the left hand side radiator. The right hand side one is going to be covered by the stairs, so there's no point drawing that. Next, we'll mark up a midpoint at the right hand side wall for the mezzanine level floor. A cross is used again to do that, and then project a line on the right hand side wall. So for this next bit, I am basically putting on the markings for my countertop, which is going to be 1.5 increments away from the back wall. And I've also shown the stair position, which is going to be 1 meter wide and half a meter away from the back wall. Then the column is drawn, the center line of which is basically at the center of the room. And also I'm showing the tall sort of island unit that you can typically get in these open plan type of kitchens, living spaces. And then the sofa in front of it. There's also going to be a bookshelf on the left hand side. So next I'm projecting my landing, which I've basically indicated on the ground floor, but then I can now project it up to the mezzanine level, and then I'm connecting the nosing of the stair with the landing. So for this next bit, I'm just using an edge of paper to then mark up a 10 centimeter line in front of it. And using this trick here, I can divide the edge of the paper into 10 increments. This is just to save me using calculator, and it's a bit more accurate as well. So once that's done, I can then pull up the risers up and the goings towards the vanishing point number 1. If you are in doubt at any point, like how you should project any of these lines, just remember that there's only 3 directions possible. It's either towards vanishing point number 1, vanishing point number 2, or up and down. That's it, basically. You cannot go any other way. You can see here I'm just finishing the stair by adding depth to it. Now it's time to draw the structural stuff in our room, which is the round column that goes up to meet the beam. This beam is going to be half an increment sort of high. The width of the beam is projected from the ground up by drawing 2 points at 1/5 of an increment at either side of the beam midpoint. This means that the beam is around 25 by 20 centimeters. Then the rest of the box is drawn up to finish the beam. So the metal beam and the metal column are the main structural supports for this room. However, there's also a secondary structure, which are the timber beams, which are perpendicular to the metal beams. So we're going to mark them up by just simply projecting divisions on the ground floor up and then adding a depth to them by just drawing a increments on either side of the center point, and then drawing vertical lines. The depth, the height of these timber beams are going to be matching the metal beams because they are going to be sitting on the sort of flange of the I-beam. And then again, the box of each of these timber beams are projected towards the vanishing point number 2 as shown. And then I'm just marking up the side of the composition, shaving off about 7 centimeters. And you can see the door is now being drawn, and that's a door into a bedroom behind, which you cannot see. That is basically off the mezzanine. The rounded metal beam is finalized by a small cylinder at the top. Anyone with structural engineering background will probably disapprove of this because I think a simple flat plate at the top of the column would actually work way better. And then following that, just drawing a railing, just projected at 1 meter height from the back wall to meet the nosing of the stair and also to meet the back of the landing. And then the 2 are connected and the thickness is drawn. So you can see the railings are at equal distances away from one another. And for that, they're drawn at the nosing of each step, Similarly, the top railing is divided. And then here I'm just showing the height of the countertop, again aligning it with the windowsill. The countertops are normally 90 centimeters high, so at 75 centimeters a bit too low, but I think it will work for this sort of composition. And then the next bit is just marking up the edge of the mezzanine. It's going to be just half an increment away from the stair edge. And then showing the depth of the mezzanine. The underside of the mezzanine is 2 meters away, and the distance between the top and the bottom is 25. So 25 centimeters is the depth of the mezzanine. So guys, hit the like button if you're finding this video interesting so far. I will be providing a download link as well to all the scans from this project, including this pencil wireframe, the marker overlay, and then the final rendering as well as the vector diagram at the beginning of the video. So the mezzanine itself will also have a railing edge to prevent people falling over, which is drawn by projecting the height of the previously drawn railing at the top along the the right hand side wall. So once we have the railing drawn, we can now erase the back lines a little bit to make them less intense, and midpoints of timber beams under the mezzanine are pulled up from the increment divisions on the ground pane along the right hand side wall, and similarly to the way we did them on the ceiling, I'm adding the thickness on either side. I also project these midpoints towards the I-beam to act as a base points for the railing. The railing is then projected up, and at the moment at 0.5 meter between each railing, that's a bit too much. The openings are too big. Realistically, somebody can fall through, so I am dividing the gaps using cross methods once more to have a bit more realistic gaps between them. Strictly speaking, the gap of 25 centimeters between railings is not correct, but for the purposes of this drawing, I think it conveys the illusion of the interior space, which is basically all we need. And now I can start adding the thickness of the railings. Once the railing thickness is added, it's time to project the beams for mezzanine towards vanishing point number 1. And now I can also draw a shelving at the top and just a little cupboard at the back, full height in line with the shelving above. The shelving above is 40 centimeters deep, which is less deep than the counter underneath, which, as you remember, was 1.5 increments, so the corner is defined. This next bit, I'm drawing a box for the island unit. Again, the height for that at 1 meter is, I'm getting that height from the back wall basically and projecting it towards the island unit markings that we previously did. And just in front of that, then the couch is starting to get drawn. The basic box is defined. And then for interest, I'm just adding these slanted edges. So the back is slanted and also the legs are going to be slanted. Strictly speaking, these slanted edges should converge to a single vanishing point as well. But for the purposes of this video, it would be a bit complex, and I just decided to make them parallel. And then finally, I'm adding the divisions for the counters and adding some details to the drawing. We can now draw a bookshelf as well using the same type of method of converging the lines towards vanishing point number 1. So next, let's add the coffee table at the front of the sofa, which is basically a piece of timber cut out and metal legs have been put on it. And I'll add the floorboard subdivisions and also a nice modern lamp in the corner of the room, and then also divide the back wall in the room. So there we have it. The pencil stuff is done. Now it's time to add markers. I'm using 0.2 marker to basically outline the room, and you'll notice how the furnishings inside are all deliberately simple. This is just so that we can place a bit more importance on the what's called fenestration or rhythm of the room, which are the beams and the brickwork and floorboard pattern. So because all the elements are simple, the accent can be placed more on these functional features of the room. So the functional features become the decorative element in its own right. Then I'm adding the markers, and the rationale behind adding the markers is basically I'm trying to imitate the natural materials, and it's a bit like coloring book at this point. I would recommend to maybe get a printout of your previous drawing and then try some colors on it before then continuing. Similarly for the shadows, you don't want to go with the darker shadow first. You want to try the lighter ones and then continue with the darker shades after that. And also worth noting is that the number of the colors you use, you want to keep that to a minimum, because the more colors you use, the more busy the drawing looks like. And for a modern interior like this, less colors and materials are actually best. So you'll see here that basically what I have is a metal that's in darker gray/black color. I have a brick wall, and everything else is in timber, with the exception of, you'll see in a second, I'm going to be adding a red accent to the back wall, just again for some interest. Again, coloring in all the darker bits in. The bookshelf on the left is going to be a dark timber, just to balance out the composition a little bit. Okay, so for this next bit, I'm going to be using pastel colors for some depth to the drawing. The pastels are wrapped onto a cloth with a gentle circular motion. The cloth is then applied onto the paper sheet. I would suggest to test out the pastel on a separate piece of paper first before then going on drawing. And the sort of logic behind is similar as with the markers. You want to go lighter first, and you probably want to do the big surface areas first. For the example, I'm doing the timber because that was a bit less vivid than I would want to. And then after that, I'm adding a bit more intensity to the red, to the reflection on the ground, and a little bit on to the edges between different surfaces to create what's called contact shadows, and also soft shadows underneath the furniture and under the mezzanine and in the corners and the darker corners of the room. And then finally, really dark color to really rub in some of those areas for extra depth and for the shadows on the floor. It's really all about using kind of artistic license at this point, but also trying to figure out where the light in the room would naturally fall. And then finally, once that's all done, it's time to add accents in white and rub out some of the darker areas for reflections. The composition is now done. Thank you very much for watching this. I hope you enjoyed the video and found it useful. I will have a link in the description with the scans of the project from every step of the way. Leave a like if you find this video useful. If you like this sort of content, please subscribe for more upcoming videos. If you'd like a specific type of drawing, then please also leave a comment. And thank you very much for watching, and until the next time.